Hello, this is the Provoked Prawn, and I'm here with a behind-the-scenes look at how I'm going to be upgrading this machine behind me. Now this is my Dynamic Evo, which is my main machine. I built this quite some time ago now, maybe 6 months, I don't know, it feels like a while ago. Built a lot of machines. And this is the one that I use as my daily driver. Now I used to run a 3090 in here, I upgraded to a 4090. But what I want to do is upgrade a number of other parts in there. So as you can see from these shots down the bottom here, there's a NVMe SSD adapter. So this has, I think 4 or maybe it's 2, I can't remember. It has a number of slots in there for putting in extra NVMe drives, and you can actually run them at Gen 5 speeds as well. On the bottom slot, I think, it might not even be this motherboard. Sometimes I've used stuff from other things. I think it might have come with the Formula motherboard, and then I kept it for this motherboard. But it's basically a PCIe X16 card that runs NVMe drives in it. The reason I'm mentioning that is because I'm actually going to remove that while also doing a number of other upgrades. And the reason I'm removing it is because I'm going to be changing the 4090 into a vertical mount because I think it will look nicer. And I'm also going to swap all the fans. So these are SL120 V2 fans. I like them, but I really like the Infinity fans more. I think they're more aesthetically pleasing. I've just got the reverse fans from Lian Li, which allow you to put them facing towards you but get intake. So you'll see that the AIO is mounted on the side panel here with currently set to intake. So they're set with the backs facing you. Doesn't look that great. With the reverse fans from Lian Li with the Infinity fans, I'll be able to put them the other way around, so you'll be able to see the Infinity mirrors. So I'm going to swap out all of those. So I'm making a number of changes. We're going to vertical mount the GPU, get rid of the PCIe card, upgrade all the storage. So there's multiple drives in there. There's actually 5, I think, 5 NVMe SSDs, maybe 6. I need to check. In there currently. Most of there are a mix. So there's like a couple of 1 terabyte drives and a couple of 2 terabytes. Some Gen 3, some Gen 4. And then I've got a 250 or maybe 512 gig standard 2.5 inch SSD in the back. Obviously, I've also got the original NZXT Kraken Z73 in there. Now, unfortunately, I don't have the new Elite cooler in a 360mm. I did think about buying it because I was going to upgrade to that. But what instead I'm going to do is use the Corsair H150i Elite Caplix with its LCD display, because I've got a white version of that, and I think that'll look nicer. And it'll give me an excuse to just change the thermal paste and just refresh the build. Probably could just carry on with the Kraken, to be fair. It's a great cooler, I really like it. You can just swap out the fans for the Infinity fans and put them on, but I thought I'm just going to refresh the whole thing just to show how I'm doing it. Obviously keeping it like the CPU the same. But I've got multiple 2 terabyte crucial drives that I'm going to swap out for the main drives. Obviously, that means I'm going to lose Windows. And if you're wondering, all the other drives, I've got one drive that's dedicated just to videos like this, video files that I'm recording. Another one that's dedicated to just gameplay clips. So when I'm recording gameplay, I can have that on there. And a drive specifically for Windows, and then a drive specifically for games. And then just a mess of other drives. I've also got a NAS drive and other things, so it's probably over the top in terms of the number of drives, like your average person would need this, but as you can imagine, I get a lot of video files and a lot of gameplay clip files from my other channel, so they take up a lot of room, and it's nice to have fast drives. So I'm actually going to upgrade to one Gen 4 NVMe SSD and 2 Gen 5s, although this motherboard doesn't support Gen 5, but those Gen 5s have to be 2 terabytes, so I'm going to misuse them in a motherboard that doesn't support Gen 5 at the moment, so they're not going to get the speed that they should do, but they'll have the storage capacity. So, and then in the future, I'll probably be upgrading to Z890 anyway, so hopefully that'll have Gen 5 support. Weirdly, as a side note, this is a ROG Z790 motherboard, which doesn't have any NVMe Gen 5 lanes in it, which is weird because the Z690 does. So the Strix Z690 that I did a video on a while back and used in a build actually does have a Gen 5 port, but this one doesn't. So this was a weird motherboard because this is a Z790 motherboard, which is a really nice looking one, but it's got DDR4 RAM, so no DDR5, and no Gen 5 NVMe SSD, but it does have Gen 5 PCIe X16 for graphics card, even though that is actually not used at the moment. Even the 4090 isn't Gen 5, I don't believe. I think there's no actual graphics cards out there at the moment that support Gen 5. So that's pretty nuts. So quite a few different changes. So what I'm starting to do now is just getting some clips of it in its original state as it is. Although, you know, like I said, I actually upgraded the 3090. So the whole point is I'm upgraded from the 3090 to the 4090 vertical mount and getting rid of the drives. Also, I have got a air panel. So this is the Dynamic Evo. I've also got an air panel for this, so which is a front perforated panel. I'll swap out for the glass one. I'm going to install more fans. I'm actually going to put two 140mm infinity fans on the front, I'm thinking, or maybe three 120s. I'm not actually sure what's going to happen there. Drama I'm going to have is I'm probably going to end up with two controllers. I might well put the strimmer cables in as well, so get the RGB cables on the 24 pin and on the GPU, because I've got those, which is another controller. So I might end up with three Lian Li controllers plus a Corsair controller. So it's four controllers. I'm probably going to need USB hubs, so that's five things back in the back of this case. From memory and from experience, there's not much room in the back of the case. It's actually quite limited in the space. I ended up stuffing a couple of the controllers in the hard disk drive cage, and it was a bit of a mess. So it's a nice case, and it is quite roomy at the back, but when you start putting loads of RGB in there like this, or more, because I did actually have more in there before, so I can talk from experience. I did have the strimmer cables in here, but I took them out temporarily because I was going to use them in another build so that I could show off the more recent version. Once you've got all that, it just gets out of hand. But it's always the way. Like Corsair stuff has always been a nightmare for RGB until the IQ Link as well. Once you start throwing in RGB fans, you know, you've got loads of controllers in the back of the case, loads of cables, it just becomes insane. But once again, you'll see my cable shame, and the reason why I don't cable tie, because I'm going to take this whole thing apart, and if it was all cable tied, it'd be a nightmare, and it isn't at the moment. It's all just sort of stuffed in the back, and it's been fine like that. There's no problems with it because the airflow isn't blocked in any way. It's all just in the back. It's fine as long as it's not too taut. It might cause problems at the PSU end or the GPU end in terms of graphics cables. In terms of the cables not being plugged in properly, there's no problem. The airflow, obviously, for the PSU is from the bottom right, and I'm not stopping that. And then the airflow from these fans isn't being blocked either because there's vents at the back, so there's no reason this is not an issue. So I'm going to take this apart, but also, bear with me a second, but also I'm going to be taking this one apart. And to do what I want to do, I've got to take apart two PC cases. So this is the Air Mini, and this is the one that has all the reverse fans in it from Lian Li that I used, and some of the other standard Infinity fans in there as well. And I've got to strip all of those out before I can do any more. I love this case, to be honest. It's a really nice one. It's a bit smaller than the Evo though, and so I don't want to try transferring what I've got into there. The 4090 would fit in there, but it would be tight, and the airflow is not quite as good, I don't think, and it's just not as roomy at the back, but it is a very nice system, and it looks really nice as well, as you can see. I did this with the Galahad Trinity cooler and the reverse fans, and I think it looks amazing, but this system doesn't need to stay as it is, so it's going off, and then I'm going to strip it down and build in the Evo. Here's the now naked Air Mini. I've stripped out the top fans, the rear fan, front fans and bottom fans. Obviously the fans on the radiator are staying because that's actually included with the Galahad. I'm going to leave this like this, but I wanted to talk just briefly about first world YouTuber problems, because really I should strip this case down entirely because then it'll be ready for use in the future. I've also reused this case like 5 times or something ridiculous now, because I did the Galahad cooler in it. I've done an air build with a Noctua CPU cooler. I did this cooler. I think I did maybe a deep cool in there. Can't remember. Something else. And I've used different motherboards in here as well, and different GPUs and all sorts, different fans. Great case, really easy to build in. It's quite compact, as you can see. You can only fit 280, 240 mil rad on the back here. You could put a 360 up top potentially, but very tight because there's not much room here. Anyway, point is I'm going to leave this like this temporarily, just so I can protect the CPU, because I was thinking about deconstructing this cooler, putting it back in its box and getting ready for the next one. I'm also going to steal this leather tie off of here because I think that'll look cool on my build. And then I'll have to strip this down again in future. This is 3060 Ti, I think. And I've been using this for ages as well on various different builds. But I actually built this PC for my daughter. Then I had to strip it down to do this Galahad cooler. And then I gave it back to my daughter. Then I'm stripping it down again. So she keeps losing the PC. First world problems. But yeah, just a bit behind the scenes look at this. So I'm just going to put this back together and then stick it up the loft or in a corner for the moment and probably reuse it again in the near future. At which point I'll have to strip it apart, take out the power supply unit and all the other bits. But if I do that now, then that's time not spent making videos. So first world problems. So this is the hyperdrive, which has 2 NVMe SSDs in it, 2 very different ones, both 1 terabyte. Tabron and a WD Black SN850, both 1 terabyte each. And obviously then that also goes along with 4 drives in here. So this is what I had going on. I've got literally 6 NVMe SSDs plus a standard 2.5 inch SSD in the back. So now I'm going to swap out these. Now I'm going to get rid of this. Obviously I'm going to keep the drives, but I don't need this card right now, or I'm going to lose it. I'm obviously going to lose storage, but as I said, you've got 1 terabyte. I think that's a 1 terabyte. That's a 1 terabyte. That might be 2. So what I'm going to do is put 2, 2, 2, 2, and then obviously I'm losing these. I think overall I'll probably end up with the same amount of storage. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and then it'll be 2, 4, 6, 8. Yeah, so I'll have 1 terabyte more storage. Not a great deal more, but... So now I've got it largely stripped down, as you can see. Top fans are out, bottom fans are out, rear fans out. I've also installed all the crucial drives that I was planning on installing. Although this T700 weirdly won't fit in properly. I think the body's a bit too fat and the thermal pads behind it are pushing it up a little bit too much, but it's staying there mostly. I've still got to take the rad off, but before I get to that, this panel comes off because what we're going to do is swap out that glass panel for the air panel instead. So I have a separate box which has an air mesh kit in it. Purchased this separately, the front mesh kit. So essentially just replaces this and turns it into like a Air Mini, but less mini. So this is specifically for the Evo, and we just need to take this front panel off. Now the question becomes, do I fit it beforehand? Because it uses a couple of trays which basically go down here with the fans on them. Obviously now I've got to account for fans on the front. Maybe I should do a test fit, because will the rad still fit in there? I hadn't even thought about that. I imagine it will. It's probably going to be tighter, which means it'll be tighter to get out and tighter to get in. So what I might actually have to do is do a test fit just to see, because obviously it's going to be something like this. In theory, that would be fine, wouldn't it? That's not going to get in the way, so I think it'll be okay. So this is actually from the top fan. So this is the top fan. It's got a fan tray. It won't look quite like this because the tray's actually just a couple of lines, kind of like the 216, I think. But it shows, you know, 3 front fans. Obviously, I'm going to do intake on them. That's what that's going to look like. So that'd be pretty cool. It's coming on nicely, I think, and I'm excited to see how this goes. Hopefully it'll look mint. Let's find out. So this is the current mess at the back of the case. I want you to remember how crazy this is, because actually it's not as crazy as it's going to be when I've finished. Like I said, I'm planning on putting the strimmer in here. This is obviously the Unifan SL-V2 setup that we've got going on here. And that's only just one controller, There will be possibly 3 by the time I've finished, so that's going to be fairly crazy. I'm also just about to remove the radiator and the all-in-one cooler, and obviously replace that as well, and that in itself is going to require putting a commander in here and just making things a little bit more nuts. I'm also going to remove the 600 watt Corsair power cable. Or am I? Or am I? Maybe I'm not actually. I'm going to use a strimmer cable in place of this. I'm just going to take it out temporarily. Might actually be using this plugged into the strimmer, to be fair. We'll get there in a minute. And then obviously I've got to replace this controller with the Infinity controller. And this is all plugged in as well somewhere. Oh, that's the sync cable, which is probably from the rad. Yep, it is. That's from the radiator fans. And then I obviously also have a USB connection and things that need removing. And I've not taken that RGB cable off, so I need to do that as well. One of the things I wanted to see here is when I ran the tests on the case before I unbuilt it, is the temperature of the CPU was actually 100 degrees, which is unusual. I think maybe the thermal paste needs swapping out. Also, it's probably overclocked automatically by the board, which is a problem. Just noticed that the thumb screws are loose, so it might have been that, which is weird because I remember tightening them up. Other things of note is I got asked recently about the tubes pushing up against the RAM. That is a problem with these NZXT coolers. You can see if you've got 4 sticks, it pushes right up against this one. It hasn't caused any problems. It doesn't damage it from my experience. These all still work just fine, but obviously it's not ideal. You could mount tubes down instead, so they could be at the bottom, which actually NZXT recommends. For this, I want to see if the thermal paste is actually covered the entirety of the CPU with the standard thermal paste that's installed. I'm actually going to be replacing it anyway with Cryonaut. So while doing the upgrade, I'm going to upgrade the thermal paste to Thermal Grizzly's Cryonaut paste, which is very good cooling, and obviously I'm changing the cooler as well, so it'll be an interesting experience. It has got a good coverage. You can see that there are some spots that aren't perfectly covered, but it's pretty good. It's not terrible. This was, I believe, the standard paste. It might not have been actually. I might have applied it. I can't remember. It's been a while since I've done this. I might have actually put that on, in which case there's decent coverage, but maybe it was a bit thin actually, because it looks like it's a bit thin in places, so that could be the problem. But I'll sort that out with the next install. Here's a fun first world problem for you. So in order to mount the new cooler, I need to take this backplate off. So I've either got to remove this tray, or I have to just lift the motherboard ever so slightly, which is what I did last time I had this problem. So it means I basically take all these standoff screws off, just lift it up a little bit and push it out the back. It's not ideal, either of those solutions. Or alternatively, I'll take the whole motherboard out, because I've also got to put the other back plate in. I'm just taking the fans off the radiator, and you can see, possibly, there is dust build up on here, which is to be expected. Now these are obviously set to intake, so they will pull in air in. See some of it there, but you also will see the dust rings on here as well, on the radiator, and on the rear. So I saw a comment on Reddit where someone was asking what those rings were. I don't know how well you can see them here, but there are just rings around it. Bear in mind, this has only been on there like 6 months, I think. So, you know, that's some amount of build up now. Bit of air gun, blow through. You could just do that to clean it up, or compressed air. You could actually wash this as well, as long as you avoid getting it on the thing itself, but you could just run this under a tap because it's just radiator fins. Run that under a tap, leave it to dry, clear that out. Obviously clean up the fans and the case as well, which is something I'm going to do now. But if you're trying to, you know, improve performance of a PC that's been going for a while, stripping it down like that, renew the thermal paste, maybe take the radiator off, take the fans off the radiator, wash the radiator, give it a clean, give the fans a clean, give the, you know, dust filters a clean and everything else. Probably get much better performance out of it. Might even just boost the performance up a little bit just with those few fixes, and obviously just make it look a bit nicer because these fans are dirty on both sides, not massively, but a little bit. If you've been running the system for a year or more and you haven't regularly blown some air into it, you're going to have some build up. I definitely have. I'm pretty good with cleaning mine, but it's still grubby. People will tell you to put tubes down. I've done a video on this so many times now. I will say, oh, you've got to put tubes down because otherwise you'll get air bubbles. Because they've watched Game of Nexus and they don't understand. And I keep having to tell people that, you know, it doesn't matter. And also this looks horrible, right? And it won't even work because it's going to be in the way of the GPU. Well, they could technically run them behind the GPU probably, but I'm not going to do that because you don't need to worry about bubbles. Because it's going to go like this, as it has been, and then it's going to go like that. And the bubbles will end up, if there is any, in the very top of this, and they're unlikely to cause problems in the tubes. The pump's here, the air bubbles shouldn't end up in the pump. That's the important point. Don't let the air bubbles get in the pump. The concern is if the pump's up here for some reason, which it just wouldn't be unless you're mad. So it makes no sense for that. So to be the top point, because so the air, if there is any air, it's going to end up in here. Yes, it could, if it gets high enough, eventually the tube's then not contacting the liquid. But if you're really worried about that, that's going to be years before that's a problem. So you could do it this way around. Or alternatively, just top mount your radiator instead. Then the bubbles will end up at the very top of it. I don't want to do that though. I like it side mounted, and I've actually shown that it's actually better. So that's what I'm going to do now, is side mount the radiator. Before I do that, I'm going to put the fans on it because it'll be easier. And then obviously we're going to end up with the intake reverse fans sitting on here. So you get to see the infinity mirrors, and then I'm going to have intake on the front, intake on the bottom, and then exhaust out the top and rear. So I'm hoping that cold air will be blowing across here onto the radiator, but also sucking through there, so there'll just be loads of cool air coming through. And then obviously cool air going straight onto the GPU from below, as well as from the front. Now I've seen some people do intake this way and exhaust that way, but then I always think, well, you're just immediately exhausting air then, aren't you? So you're starving the GPU of any air or any of these components, apart from the bottom. But if you think about it, right, you've got bottom fans mounted here, blowing air upwards, they hit the GPU, but also maybe, you know, the NVMe drives and other things. But some of it's blocked by the graphics card. So this, like the RAM, and this isn't going to get cooled. Whereas if you've got air coming from the front, and turbulence is going to mean it's going to hit this area as well, and then obviously exhaust out the top. That's my preferred format. That's what I've used in multiple builds, and I've tried different ways, and it's like one that's a good compromise between aesthetics and performance. So one of the things I want to talk about briefly is the wiring of the fans that are on the radiator. I've done a video separately on this previously, which is all about how we basically set these up and don't connect them to the controller. So this is the Infinity controller, as an example. It doesn't have to be the Infinity, it could be the SL or AR 120 controller, basically the same logic. Usually you have that fat connector cable that comes out and then connects up the other end with a single cable that plugs into the fans. That then does the power and the RGB line. Now I'm of the opinion that it's better to let the motherboard control the fan speed of the radiator fans. And obviously, if you still want to sync the RGB lighting with this, then that becomes a bit more complicated. So the standard cable looks like this. So this is the standard cable that comes with the infinity fans. So if you get a single infinity fan, you get this connector. On one end connects to the fan, on the other you get a 5-volt RGB header and then a fan power cable connector. This is a pain, in my opinion, because, you know, in the system where you've got a single fan, this connector is actually useless because it will not connect to the standard controller. Not like that anyway, right? So this 5-volt RGB header could go to your motherboard, and then this to the CPU fan header. So that's what I would do as at a basic level. The alternative is to get an additional cable. Now you can purchase separately this, and this comes in an accessory pack. This actually came with the Trinity cooler, but you can get them separately. And I believe there's actually one that is split into two, so you can do two different fans into one. But the idea here is this transforms a 5-volt RGB header. So this cable plugs in like this. He says, I'm struggling to do it because 5 volts are a pain. And there we go. So this is an ARGB adapter cable. You can buy them from Lian Li. You can probably get them from alternative places. So this is the connector that then results in that. Then what you do is that you get your standard Infinity controller and you just plug it into the sync port. So then the logic is fairly straightforward. That connects to the fan, this connects to the CPU fan header, and then your connector, your adapter, then goes to the sync port. So then your RGB lighting on your radiator fans is still the same. So the radiator fan still goes to the controller because it's that single connector, which comes with a single pack. That connects up to this, to the sync port, and then the fan power is controlled by the motherboard. Meanwhile, the all-in-one pump is controlled by the AIO pump header, which is here on this motherboard, but it's sometimes up by the CPU fan. And so the pump's controlled by the motherboard, as is the fans on here. So that means the fan speed is controlled by the motherboard rather than by L-Connect via this. So that means that these might spin at a different speed to the rest of the fans in the case, but it does mean that that is a better closed system for better cooling potentially of your CPU, because if the motherboard detects the CPU's getting too hot, it'll ramp up both these and the pump and give you better performance to keep that cool. In the meantime, you've still got the synced RGB lighting. If you connected the 5-volt RGB cable instead to the motherboard, obviously these would then not be in sync with the rest of the case unless you're using motherboard syncing. So this is the better way to do it, but unfortunately it's a pain because they don't include this cable with the single fans, and they don't include it with the triple pack, I don't think. You have to buy it separately. I have got some of them, so maybe they do include it with the triple pack. I can't remember right now, but I want to show the logic of it and how it works. So that's what I've got set up now in there. So here's the sort of thing you can't account for when you're doing sort of planning out how this is going to work. Obviously, I'm right near the end of this now, but a few things. Like I was going to use the strimmer cables, but if you're using at the back, which was my original plan, they would basically not be visible because you'd be plugging it in like this. So you have to use them from the front, which then means I'm blocking the fans, and it'll be really tight, like really tight. And I don't know if I want to do that. I'll be blocking the bottom fans and the top fan and the GPU fans and the design of it. And I don't know if I'm that bothered about the RGB from that. So I might just lose that, I think, and just go with the standard Corsair fan, PSU cable into the back here. Other things are, this is the vertical GPU mount from Lian Li, which is designed for this case. But as you can see, it's sagging ever so slightly. And there's quite a wobble, but that's not really going to be a problem. The interesting things here are, this is a little screwdriver slash anti-sag bracket supplied by Asus with the Strix GPU, but you can't get it under there because of the fans, and you can't put it there because of the door. So I'm going to have to do something crazy like this, where you basically just put it in at an angle in the very corner. I think that might work. See how we get on with that. So I'd be pointing up like this, because there's no real alternative, because obviously I can't put it on top of the fans because it's too tall. You can't do it, and then it doesn't reach quite far enough. Interestingly, in the standard position, it was far enough forward that you could put it underneath, but for some reason this way around it isn't. I don't know whether I've mounted the fans further forward. I don't think so, though. Also, this vertical mount goes in multiple different positions, so you can technically put it lower. So there's a compromise between seeing the cooler display and having the GPU closer to the fans. If you put it on its bottom setting, which is right at the bottom of the case, it blocks the intake fan, the final intake fan at least. So I've compromised where I'm blocking a little bit of the display and a little bit of the fan, because I'd rather keep the airflow going than have to worry about the display. I don't know whether I like it in this vertical mount. I'm going to do some thermal testing, see if I'm happy with it. I mean, it does look nicer for sure, but I think the sag might be a bit frustrating. It's not mega, but I don't know what I can do about it unless you can get something to sit underneath there. There's nothing supplied that you could do with. But anyway, other things, the tubes for the rad obviously have this option of being sort of set back, which I kind of like actually, or I could pull them out and put them above. They aren't touching the GPU here though, so they might actually be all right like that. Kind of flush. But now I've blocked most of the infinity mirrors. There's no point in putting the reverse fans in, you can't see them now. So this vertical mounting might not, I don't know if I'll stick with it. Be interesting to see. Let me know what you think, whether I should or not. Because obviously I dropped my adapter card in favour of this setup. I think it'll probably be it will still be better for cooling, but I'm not 100% happy with just the look of it really. I think I can do better. So I'm going to stick with this for now, but I'm going to ditch that one strimmer. So I'm just going to have the 24-pin motherboard strimmer, I think. It's a shame because I do like them, but I don't think that'll look good. I don't think that'll be a good look, which is a shame. I'm half tempted to do it just to show that it isn't a good look, but it's actually not quite long enough because you'd have to pull it right through. And obviously you don't want a lot of tension on the graphics card cable. It's very important with a 4090, so I'm not going to do it, I don't think. I'm going to take it out. Thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed it. Be sure to check out the full video. We're going into depth on all the different things. I actually didn't see the entire process